Okay, printmakers, so we're going to learn how to do the second carve, transfer image, and then the second printing. So what I have right now is I have all 10 of the prints that I've already done, completely printed, dried, and laid out. I want you to photograph these as is so I can see that you finished 10 prints on multiple colors of paper, possibly on some of your mono prints, and photograph these as they are. Then you're ready to move on to the second carve. So this was my highlights, which I can now discard because I no longer need it. I'm now looking at my midtones. So my midtones are picking up some of those middle gray tones. And what I've done already is I've already colored on the back of it so that I can transfer it pretty effectively. I didn't worry about this area where the sky was, but I got the rest of the image. I used a number 4B pencil, but a 2B will work as long as you push hard. So lining up the image is one of the most important steps when you're transferring to this point. So I'm going to move my shadows and original image out of the way. And now I have a pen. I had my pencil, which I can move. I have all my inks and brighters laid out, but I need tape and I need my carving tools. So I'm going to get this laid out. So you have your picture. One of the nice things is you have these grooves that you can actually feel, and that way you can line up your image as best you can. So knowing that this part of the column is a highlight, I can actually feel that it lays within that groove. I'm going to do the same thing for this little section here, and I'm also going to kind of figure out where this little dent was that was up in my pediment. Once I know that I have things kind of laid out where they need to be, I'm going to tape everything down to my plexiglass. And the reason for that is if you need to move it, you can just move the entire plexi like that rather than trying to untape it from the table or wherever your desk is and trying to transfer it at another location. So you want to tape it on all four sides as best you can. I'm using a purple pen, just because it's a little bit easier to see the color, and I have quite a bit of detail. If I was using a black or a blue, it might be a little bit harder to see. So now I'm ready to start pushing as hard as I can to transfer as much of this information. When you're transferring, I would suggest coloring in as best you can the gray tones, kind of like you're shading, because that's what's going to show up on the actual linoleum. So color it in as best you can. You can kind of see the purple pen is showing up there. So I'm doing my best to color in all of those dark gray areas. This is going to be my next carve. So the darker I can make it, the more it's going to show up on the actual soft cut block. So I'll come back to you once I've transferred all of this information. Okay, you can see now that I have transferred by coloring in all my kind of mid-tone areas. You can kind of see the pen details. Some of the areas that I didn't worry about were some of these little kind of lighter areas there. I'll have to just pick and choose what I actually carve out there. But I try to get as many of those little details as possible, and then I shaded in these tones on the column. At some point, try to check yourself to see that the graphite is actually transferring. So you can see the dark graphite there. My block is stained green, which makes it a little bit darker, a little bit harder to see, but you can still see that it's transferring pretty well in most parts. This is where your image is going to have to be a pretty good guide for you. So take off your image and just lay it right by where you're going to carve. Try not to rip it. So kind of peel your tape off and lay it maybe just above where you're going to carve so you can constantly reference where you're going to carve and where you're going to remain. Now remember, in the first carve, I had made a decision to keep my sky still there. I'm actually going to change it now and carve out my sky. That's going to be one of the first things that I do. So if you remember from the different blades, I have a really big blade. This one is a number 5 blade, so I'm going to use it because it has a really big scoop and I can get a lot of information out pretty quickly. What this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to define this edge of the architecture, and then this entire area is completely gone. One of the things, if you're doing a large area, that you want to think about is how your pattern will look. So I'm going to try to keep all my lines carved kind of in the same direction so that if ink picks up on some of those little grooves, you have kind of a cool patterning that happens as well. Even if you don't want it there, you can go back and re-carve it out, but at least you'll know that it's all going the same direction. So I'm going to start by carving out my entire sky, and I'm going to just kind of keep that pattern kind of mimicking the architecture. If you want to make it look like clouds or kind of swirls in the sky, depending on your image, you can get kind of fancy and creative with that. But determine what kind of scoop. You can see that this takes out a large chunk as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and finish my sky and come back to you, and then I'll show you how to get into some of those other details and determine what to carve and what not to carve. Okay, you can see now that I have all of my sky cut out. I kind of kept my directional marks going. You can choose to smooth this out more, but as long as it's lower than the raised area, the ink will really only print on this area and maybe only pick up just a little bit of detail here. So that's your determination if you want to carve that shallower or deeper. It's up to you. You can see how it looks from the side there. There's a little bit of grooving, but I like that texture because I think it's going to look really interesting in the sky area here of my prints. So now I'm going to take a closer look at my details. I have these larger columns which have some of the areas cut out, but I know that I'm going to need to cut out larger areas. I'm going to change my blade to a number 3, so it's still a kind of bigger blade, but it gives me a little bit sharper detail because it's more of a V rather than a U gouge that I was just using. So I'm going to start with the things I'm most confident on, and that is this column here, this column, this one, and so forth, because you can see it's a little bit harder to read what the transfer is. You have to just keep looking back and forth between your image and your drawing here that you're carving into. So I'm going to just try to define some of those lines a little bit with my sharper 3, and then I can go back in and again determine kind of the directional markings that I want to use for getting some of these larger areas out. So I'm going to use kind of a diagonal approach, almost with a little bit of a curve, so it almost appears round. And that's just determines, your image will just determine what that is. So it's up to you how you want to do it. So I'm going to keep going and kind of carve out these areas. So again, I'm starting to see that pick up those columns. And when you compare it to the print itself, this is this area here, and then I'll start to be able to define that more distinctive column. When you get to your edge here, there's always a little bit of a lip because of how these were cut, probably at the art store. So you'll probably want to get rid of that lip on the edge there so it doesn't pick up ink. But again, that's up to you. Maybe you want there to be a little bit of a border. So whatever works for you. So I'm just going to go back in here and really detail this out. So I'm going to carve the rest of the way, which will probably take me about 15 minutes or so, and then come back to you all and show you how to print. Okay, everyone, you can see here I have now detailed out as much as I could reasonably pull from my image and from what I transferred. So I think I've got a lot of information. A lot of this detail I had to do a little bit of guessing, but I'm just getting it as close to similar to this as I can. You can see some of those kind of little details, and so I try to mimic that in my carving. So at this point, I've cleaned my workspace. I don't have any of the carvings around because you don't want those to get into your ink. And now I'm ready to take my prints, and I'm putting my worst one on top and working up to my best one by the end, because I want to be able to practice on these first ones, because by the end of this project, you're only going to turn in your 3 best ones. That's why I have you do 10, because there's some that aren't going to work as well. So this one was a little light, and I figured it would be a good one to practice on. So I'm going to stack those here so they're ready for me. I have my ink here, so I'm just going to spread this out, move this over a little bit, just make sure I don't have any of those little carvings. I noticed a few of them fell off. Now I'm ready to kind of pick my color scheme. Since I'm going with more of a cool tone color scheme, I'm going to stick with my turquoise, green, and blue. And then by the time I print my shadows, I'm going to print them in a dark color, like a dark purple or a black. So I'll pull that black aside right now and make sure I have enough workspace. Just a reminder, your palette knife is helpful for spreading your ink out. I also still have my carving tool in case I find that there's areas of my block that I still need to gather a little bit of the grit out of it. Sometimes if you rub with your hand, you can feel a little of those things roll off. You just want to try to get it as clean as possible so it doesn't pick up with the ink. You can see I have a couple of them right here, a little bit of grit. So I'm going to lay that aside and be ready to start rolling out my ink. So just a reminder with this ink, this is the type of ink that really does have a nice sound to it when you squeeze it out and roll it out. So I'm just going to squeeze about that much out for now. I'll add more later as I need to. And then I'm going to roll it out. If I need to, I can always spread it out a little bit with my palette knife just to get a more even consistency. And so now you can really hear that click sound, because this is very specific to block printing ink. You can see it actually says the word block printing ink on it. So this is not the generic ink that we use from the kit, but rather a specific to block printing. So I'll move this so you all can see it. Same rules apply here. You want to roll in one direction to start with. You'll see the colors start to pick up. I also am wearing a smock because this does tend to splatter, you'll notice. So I'm going in one direction to start. Notice there's a little bit that's picking up on the sky, but I'm okay with that. Now I'm going to go the other direction so that I'm getting the ink in all areas. And you can see if I've carved deep enough. If I feel like I haven't carved deep enough, I can always go back in right now and carve out a little bit more. Now, lining up your print is one of the hardest parts, but once you get it, you're pretty good at it. So depending on your righty or lefty, you want to line up your print block so that there's approximately 1/4 of an inch between the edge of your block and the print surface itself. The reason is that the thickness of the block is about 1/4 of an inch. So I've lined it up on both the top and the bottom. I make sure that it's as close as I can get. And then this is my trial. So I'm just going to kind of lay it down carefully. As I lay it down, I can kind of see if it's lining up or not. If I need to shift it, I can. So now the block is down. I need to press it and then go like this. This is where your hand is going to become important. We did the spoon technique before, but now because you have so many grooves, you're going to want to use your hand as best you can. I kind of use the side of my thumb just because I want to get it where all of those grooves are. The spoon doesn't necessarily find those grooves. You can still use a spoon, but I prefer a hand method in this case. I also sometimes use a brayer, a clean brayer that is, and that can get that kind of initial print, and then I can go in and push with my hands. So let's see how well we did with our lineup, which is called registration. All right, so not too bad. You can see that I'm starting to see some of those mid-tones come out. So you have 3 tones happening here. You have a highlight, which is your white, which you carved initially. Then the light green is actually now the mid-tone color. And I'm starting to see some of those darker mid-tones and shadows come out in those areas. So it's starting to look a little bit more 3-dimensional, which is really neat. This is the time to determine, did I get enough detail out? Should I go back and print more? Also notice I'm a little bit off right here. See where the print is a little bit over? It probably shifted when I flipped it. So that's why we have practice ones. So I'm going to show you maybe the next one will be a little bit better lined up. But this isn't a bad print. It still works. It's great to start with. But notice it's off just the teeniest bit on that one side. So let me go ahead and ink my plate up again. And then we're going to try another lineup. If at this point you feel like you need more ink, you'll know because it's not making that fun clicking sound. It kind of sounds sticky. You'll know when it starts to sound too smooth. If you're using those other inks in the jars, you just have to look at the consistency. It needs to look like velvet or felt. All right, so I'm now lining up with my edge here, and I'm going to do a little better job of lining it up. You can line up horizontally, or you could technically line it up this way. Maybe I'll show you guys that way. I have a couple of those little rubber pieces. So I'm going to show you this way, just as a way to, I can actually line my columns up a little better. So actually this might be a better approach for my print. So I'm laying it down. I'm watching as I lay it down. Am I getting it right on there? I think this one might be better. Push it down so it kind of stamps it. I'll start with my dry, clean brayer. And this is a little bit thicker paper, so you're really going to push pretty hard with your hands to really get it to print well all the way around. All right, let's see how I did. Oh, much better. Okay, so see, my borders are much cleaner. I'm almost perfectly lined up all the way around. I don't have any residual of the turquoise. However, a couple things to note. I can see that some of my little rubber things have shown up on my print. You can just kind of pick those off. You can do it now or you can do it when it's dry. Also, my ink is just a little bit dry. See that there? Probably because I was talking, I let my ink dry out. So let's do another one where I up my ink a little bit and get a better lineup. And then I'll show you all 10 once I'm finished printing them. But you can see a pretty big difference with the different paper colors, how it comes out, because this is a darker paper versus the lighter paper. All right, let's get a little bit more ink on here so that I feel more confident about my layering of ink. So I'm just going to put another little squeeze of ink on, and then now roll it out. Use my palette knife to kind of spread it just a little bit. You don't have to do that too much because the brayer does a lot of the work. And there's that better sound. You want to make sure it gets to be an even, real smooth consistency, no gloppiness. The brayer has kind of a little bit of texture on it. You can see that. So I'm just going to get that even smoother. And now I'm going to go north-south with my rolling. And then I'm going to go east-west. Make sure I have enough across the whole thing. Now I'm going to print on my matte paper, which is kind of fun. I'm interested to see how this looks. So now I think I'm going to go this way like I did before because I can line up my column lines and my left and right edge. I'm about 1/4 of an inch away, so I kind of stand it vertical, kind of check myself a little bit, make sure I'm right about where I want to be, lay it down. Another reason to have a smock is to wipe your hands clean. Flip it over, dry brayer. This is a real thin paper, so I'm going to really work those little texture edges into it with my thumb and my hand. And I can feel if I have any of those little extra rubber pieces from the carving too when I use my hands. Oh, that one looks so cool. Look at that. That looks really neat. You can really see the map still, but notice the lineup's pretty good. I'm getting a pretty good lineup all the way around. And you'll get better at it as you go. That's why you're going to do 10. All right, I'll show you when I'm done. Okay, I've now finished all 10 of my prints. So you can see kind of a nice variety in the print quality, the color combinations, how well I did with my registration. What I would do now is I would photograph all 10 of these prints so that it shows that you've now finished 10 of your mid-tone prints. And that is how you do your second layer. Good luck, guys.